It's Sunday. And it's what? Today's Chof Tammuz. It's the yahrzeit of my son, our son. His name was Menachem Mendel, Olav Shalom. We called him Menachem. Ben Yosef Yitzchak Shlita. He passed away 22 years ago. He was born Chav Hei Tammuz, Tafshin Nun Dalet. His bris was on Shloshim from Gimel Tammuz. His bris was on Shloshim from Gimel Tammuz. And he lived 4 years minus 5 days. Passed away 5 days before his birthday. And who thinks about it? Me and my wife. The truth is my wife. Now I'm letting myself think about it. Okay. I mean, such a neshama, the psagitan. But I mean in the tzad haloi toiv. Okay, so I'm freilich bei jederen. Nor freiliche gesunde simches. Larich Hashem v'sham tezom de gula shleima. Okay, Rabbi said we're learning Tanya, and I'm going to... What's going on? Perikut Gimel, we should go through Perikut Gimel quick. It shouldn't take a lot of time. But then we had an interruption with this, that, and the other, so it becomes very repetitive. And I'm hoping to create some momentum. What's happening at Perikut Gimel is that after Perikut Beis is a hard Perik. Yeah. As Rabbi Jacobson used to say, I don't remember Rabbi Jacobson, but I heard this from all of my mashpiyim. This is vogik. It's loaded. Perikut Beis is vogik. So Perikut Gimel is the supplement. Is this? Now that you know what a Beinani is, let's answer all the questions. So we answered the question about Zeh v'Zeh Sheiftan, v'lei Meishtan Chas v'Shalom. Right? He answered the question about Kol ha'olam kulei elim l'cha tzadikato heyei beinecha kerosha. Correct? And we're moving on. I'm starting Yud Ches Amud Beis, that means page 36, 4 lines from the top. Va'af, and even. We're talking about a Beinani now. Mishe b'teres adishem chefze. He desires the Eibishter's Teireh. V'yehege bo, the word higoyin means to speak. The word higoyin, yeheges from the word higoyin. Yil l'rotzen imre fi, v'hegyoyin libi. Higoyin means to speak. Higoyin means to think. And higoyin also means to reason. To verstehen. V'yehege bo, he speaks it, he thinks it, he reasons it. Yema v'layla l'shma, day and night, and he's doing it l'shma, which is a very high madrege. Says the Heilige Rebbe, Einzu hechacha klal. This is not a proof that he's a tzaddik. In other words, it's not a proof shenitcha ra mimkeme, that this person's evil was removed from his heart. He may still be a Beinani with a Yetzer Hara who can come along and introduce him to things that are behemi, that are animal-like, that are shalei lefiyerke, that are so not appropriate for his Yiddishkeit life. It's possible that the substance and the atzmus, the essence of the Yetzer Hara, of the Nefesh HaBahamis, hu betokfei, hu begvurasei, hu b'mkemei, b'chol asmoli. It's in its full hardness and in its full strength, in its place in the left ventricle of the heart. This fellow sits and learns Torah day and night, and he thinks, you're not allowed to tell the story of Lezer the Krumah to women, they get very, very upset. He Poshet abandoned his wife. Avos, Chassidus. I don't justify that act. No one justifies that act, but that's the story of Lezer the Krumah. Lezer the Krumah's vart is that he says, they asked him, what's the difference? I mean, he was a Yid whose whole life was Torah V'Aveda. There's Yid in Yerushalayim even today. Forgive me for saying it. They never worked a day in their life. They got married. They had 10 children. They never did anything but learn Torah. How they ate bread and how they breathed air and how they drank water and how they slept on a bed and how there were walls around those beds. This is amazing. 200 years ago, for sure, there were such people. His whole life was Torah V'Aveda. No, his whole life Torah V'Aveda. He hears about the Alter Rebbe. So he said to his wife, you want to move back to Russia? Gesundheit. I can't leave the Alter Rebbe. Why am I telling this to you? I'm only going to upset you, yeah? But Lezer the Krumah's word is, the teretz geblieben derselbe de kashe is an andere. That's the famous Chassidish word that you know. He says the difference before Chassidus and after Chassidus is in the kashe, not in the teretz. The teretz is The answer is that the Eibush is Akel Yochel. Hashem can do the impossible. What's the kasha? He said before, the kasha was, how could the Eibush possibly make a Gan Eden big enough for me? And the teretz is that the Eibush is Akel Yochel. Then he became a choser. He says, "V'azei haltzach der Eibush der ein for nicht zu plättern up." That's his expression. He says, "How does the Eibush control himself? I'm not smashing my head in." When the teretz is that it's Akel Yochel. The Tanya anything. It just says the emes v'desis. You're sitting and learning Torah day and night, and you have no shaykhs to the world. Yeah, but it doesn't prove that you're a tzaddik. It just proves that you're involved in tzaddik-like activities. Rak Norva Jeden, we're reading on 8 lines from the top of the page. Shalavushav, that on the level of the garments, on the most peripheral level, Shehei Machshava, Dibur, Umaisa Shel Nefsha Bahamis, the thought, speech, and action levels of the animal soul, Eina Mislapshim, there's no revealing, there's no expressing, there's no manifesting of the Nefsha Bahamis. B'mayach, and the brain to think. Va'apeh, and the mouth to speak. V'hayadayim misharevarim, and the hands and the remaining organs or limbs to do. Why? Not because you don't want to, but because you don't give in. Hashem nosan shlito mimshol. The Eibush gave shlita, yeah, shlita mit a hey. This in Lubavitch verraten. Shlita mit an aleph and shlita mit a hey. People say the Rebbe shlita. I say mit an aleph but a hey. They look at me like I'm a monkey. Is the Rebbe alive? Or does the Rebbe control your life? They're two very different things. If the Rebbe is alive and in your life you can do whatever you want, then what kind of life is that? Shlita mit an aleph means a lept. Shlita mit a hey means as a balabos. Yeah. So the Rebbe says you don't give shlita memshola. You don't give dominance to the nefesh habahamis because havaya no shlita memshola lemeach. The Eibush gave strength, dominance to the moyach alalev over the heart. Right? And as I told you earlier, the Rebbe writes, this was the thing that I made a mistake that I corrected far back, that moyach, there's 2 conditions, right? What's the beinani? The madregas beinani. Luchom memshola, right? The beinani, when he davened, he's a melech. In other words, he's mamish like a tzaddik, because he has avas Hashem and yiras Hashem. The rest of the day, he's not a melech, he's a moishel, he's controlling himself. Why? So the Rebbe writes, he writes it in Yud Gimel, doesn't write it in Yud Beis, because there's a roshim. The davening stays with you. You're not davening anymore. So the full avas Hashem and yiras Hashem that the Beini experiences, b'shas tefillah, you're not experiencing. But there's enough of it left over. In other words, what is the incentive? What is the koyach for moyach shal dalalev? What stays from the davening before? So this combination, you're not davening now, you're learning. And learning and davening are not the same thing. They're not. During davening, you have avas Hashem and yiras Hashem, so the nefesh habahamis is sleeping. During learning, unless you're a rabbi, as you'll see soon, you have a yetzaharas there. But there's a combination of the me'ach shalt ala leibet to doster betevi yetzirasa yetzazoya. The mind rules over the heart, plus the trace, what remains, haroisha mimeno, that stays from the davening from before. Therefore, b'lachein, as a result of this combination, nefesh holekis shebemayach, this divine soul which is in the brain. Meishelis dominates Birktana, the small city, which is Everi Aguf Kulam, of all the limbs of the body. Sheyihiyu, that on the practical level, the limbs of the body should be Levusha Makava, a garment and a chariot, only Lishleisha Levusha, the 3 garments of the godly soul. Sheyislapshu Behem, that the 3 garments of the godly soul assert themselves over the body. Sheheim, which is Machshava, Dibur, Umaisa, on the level of thought, on the level of speech, on the level of action, is Tayag Mitzvah Teda, it's only Mitzvah and Teda. So you're talking about a Beinani. Who's Beinani? That's B'teres Hashem Cheftzei. B'teres Yega, Yema V'Loila. Says the Rebbe, okay, you're not doing Avedis. But it doesn't mean that you have no Yetzer Hara. It doesn't mean you're a tzaddik. It simply means you're not giving him voice. You're not giving him expression on the level of the Levusha, Machshava, Dibur, Maaseh, because of this Inyan of Me'ach Shalt Alev. Avo, to be sure, Mehusa v'atzmusa shel nefesh halakis, the substance, I hate the word essence, but I'm going to use it anyway. essence of the godly soul. Ein lo shlito memshol does not have dominance and control. Al muhusa v'atzmusa over the substance and the essence. Shel nefesh abahamis of the animal soul bebenyani and abenyani. Ki im only b'shah in those moments. Sha'avas Hashem hu bezgalus libe. When the avas Hashem is revealed in the heart. When is the avas Hashem revealed in the heart of the benyani? Says the Rebbe, "V'itim mizumanim," special times. And when I learned itim mizumanim with you in Perek Yud Beis, I used the lashon eis ratzon. V'ani sefi lasi l'cha Hashem eis ratzon. Correct? Every day when we daven shacharis, we say v'ani sefi lasi l'cha Hashem eis ratzon. By mincha you don't say it. By mincha you don't say it. V'ani sefi lasi l'cha Hashem eis ratzon, except Shabbos, because Shabbos mincha is an eis ratzon. Shabbos during the week is a shvedere zeit. It's a more difficult time. So when it's shachris, which is an eis ratzon, and again the wording of the Alter Rebbe is itim mizumanim, and you're b'shas tefillah, you're davening k'yitzebo. So if you're davening, and it's this man tefillah, it's the time of tefillah l'mayla, so then when you daven, you can have avas Hashem and yiras Hashem in a revealed state. If the benyani has avas Hashem and yiras Hashem in a revealed state, then he's not a moishel, then he's a melech. Then he's not controlling his Yetzer Hara. He's educating his Yetzer. So show that in Hebrew Chaim Beis it says that Moyach Shalt Alev doesn't mean the mind controls the heart, it means the mind educates the heart. During davening, I told this to you, all these things I said to you before. During davening, the mind educates the heart. Not during davening, the mind controls the heart. That's the difference, the way the Rebbe says it in his Rishimis, between the word melucha. Melucha is the mind educates the heart. Now the heart is also, the heart meaning the nefesh abahamis, has avas Hashem and yiras Hashem. And not during davening, it's shlita, with a hey. That it's controlling the heart, but it hasn't transformed it. So during the davening, the benyan is like a tzaddik. Not during the davening, the benyan is not doing any avedas. But it's not that he's not vulnerable to Avedis. In other words, not that he's a tzaddik. He's only a madreges beinin. Okay, v'af gam zeisapa, and even at this time, ein rak shlito memshala levat. Even though during davening, you have revealed avas Hashem and yiras Hashem, and it's called in Perek Yud Beis melucha. Says the Rebbe, what is the credibility of temporary melucha? When I was a child, I used to read Yiddish. You know why I read Yiddish? Because I couldn't read English. So one of the many, many little books that I read was Faratoga Kenig. You know the story of Faratoga Kenig? Poland needed a king. And the Pritzim couldn't, for one day, a Yid was the king of Poland. One day. Faratoga Kenig, yeah? So, Faratoga Kenig is Kakenig nicht. So he says, even though during davening, I'm a melech, but because it's only for the duration of davening, so the Rebbe says, also during the time of davening. Even though I feel like a melech, now, I feel like a king over myself, because when a person has avas Hashem and yiras Hashem, the Yetzer Hara wants the same thing as the Yetzer Teiv. Why? Because it says in the Torah, and it's also common sense, it's two nations fighting against each other. And Taka, right now I'm winning. Now I'm winning decisively, because now my Nefesh HaBahamis wants the same thing as my Nefesh HaLekis, but I haven't killed him. And therefore it remains true, Kishazeh kom zeh nefel, ukishazeh kom chulu. When the Nefesh HaLekis becomes stronger, Nefesh HaBahamis falls, but Shazekah, but Nefesh HaBahamis comes stronger, and the Alter Rebbe doesn't want to speak out the second thing, so he says that right now, Nefesh HaLekis, the divine soul, Mis HaMetzes, it's exerting itself, Umiz Gaberes, and it's therefore dominating Al Nefesh HaBahamis over the animal soul. B'mekein HaGvuras, using Gvura, right? Nefesh HaBahamis is Gvura. And there's an old rule, Ein hagvuras nimtokin ela b'shorsha. You want to defeat any klipa, you have to use the koyach of the klipa itself. Since Nefesh HaBahamis is gevura, you defeat the Nefesh HaBahamis with gevura. What is gevura? Bina. She bina. Not chochma, bina. Bina. Bina means to understand. and to understand in a way that you break the idea down to little details. That's why it's Gevura. Chochmah is Chesed. And Bina is Gevura. Is Beinin Begdulas Ad Hashem, to contemplate the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in detail. That's the Gevuras. Begdulas Hashem ain't save Baruch Hu, Uleheilit. And when you're going to use the Gevura of Bina to contemplate the greatness of Hashem in details, you're going to arouse Ava, Azal, Ahavaye, Kirish Beyesh. A powerful love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is like fire attached to a coal. Hot fire. That take, it starts out b'chol money in the right ventricle of the heart. And for the duration of the davening, you had this in Tanya Pedic test, chapter 9, which was a long time ago, that it spills over. It spills over from the right side of the heart into the left side of the heart, and it's mispashet b'chol aguf koli. A beinoni during davening is in the madrega of tzaddik. Avalena is battle lagarme, it's not gone. V'haraya, when he finishes diving, it's going to come back. In other words, the Rebbe is saying, I'm telling you that the definition of madregas habeinoni is melucha memshala. That during davening he has avas Hashem and yiras Hashem is like a tzaddik. Not during davening, he doesn't have avas Hashem and yiras Hashem. He survives because of moyach, shalit, alaleiv. The mind controls the heart in a beinoni. That means a person has done any Avedis, has not done any Avedis, biteva, with the help of the davening. Says the Rebbe, but he's not a real melech. Because faratok, akenig is kakenig nish. Do you understand? In the previous Pedic, I called it meluch. Says the Rebbe, anybody who's a king now and is a dictator, in an hour from now, he's not a real kingship. Because it's not sustained. What's the difference between a king and a dictator? Simple. Malchusei beratzen. A king is accepted by the subject willingly. Does the Nefesh HaBahamis embrace what the Nefesh HaLakis wants? That's a tzaddik. Is the Nefesh HaBahamis forced, is compelled to do what Nefesh HaLakis wants? That's a beinoni. If for a while my Nefesh HaBahamis wants what Nefesh HaLakis wants, and the rest of the time he doesn't, that's not a real king. We use the word melech, but it's not a real melech, because there comes a nevel, it's not sustained. And the Rebbe continues, Ela b'tzadik. But by a tzaddik it's melucha. Why? Because tzaddikim are not on and off. Tzaddikim are not moody. Tzaddikim are constant. Shene'emar beh, that by a tzaddik it's written, V'libi cholo b'kirbi. David HaMelech says about himself, my heart is hollow within me. He, what's the word? He carved out. David HaMelech tore out of his heart his nefesh HaBahamis, his yetzer, and as a result, he's in Madregas Tzaddik. Madregas Tzaddik, v'hu meyes. We talked about this. We talked about this in chapter 10. Pedic Yud was Tzaddik. And what do we discuss in Pedic Yud? That the difference between a beinoni and a Tzaddik is not whether it's hard or easy to control his yetzer hara. The difference between a beinoni and Tzaddik is two things. Oyev Hashem, sin ura. Those are two things. Number one, he loves the Eibishter, and number two, he hates evil. How much of each? It's based kavim shkulim. The same amount that you love Hashem, that's the same amount that you hate evil. The same amount that you hate evil, that's how much you love Hashem. So if you're a tzaddik gomer, you love Hashem completely and you hate evil completely. And it's a cold hate. It's not even beregesh. Because it's beyond a feel. If you're a tzaddik she'enei gomer, your love for Hashem is incomplete, and your hate for evil is also incomplete, and that's why it's a very passionate love for tov and a very passionate hate for ra. But if a person is defined by his emotions and not by his actions, then he's a tzaddik. Either a tzaddik gomer or a tzaddik she'enei gomer. Look at the words. Moyes berad, disgusted by evil, v'seina, and he hates it. And of course, remember that it's based kavim shkulim. The same way you hate evil, that's the same way you love good. The same way you love good, the same way you hate evil. Betachles hasin avamiyas, with complete hate and disgust, which means you're a tzaddik gomer. Or shalei betachles hasin kanal, or not complete hate, because you're a tzaddik she'enei gomer. But that's a tzaddik. A tzaddik is defined by avas Hashem and yiras Hashem. I'll tell you two Hasidische Gedanken. Is the clock still working, or it's a time? Yeah, it's the right time. Yeah? Oh, okay. 2 bits ahead or behind? Behind. So we have to change the battery. In other words, it's...
No. That's how I told you.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it's keeping the time.
It's not important. It's in between. It's basically the right time.
Okay, we'll see. With
It's
Zen.
working.
Okay. Two chassidische Wörter. The first is this. One of the most famous personalities in Chabad, he really is a famous personality, is Kushya Lepler. Kushya, yeah? Kushya Lepler. There were a lot of Kushyas in Lubavitch. I don't know if they all come from the first Kushya Lepler, right? In your mishpach, there's a lot of Kushyas. But the Kushya mit a tof, nicht mit a shin. There's a very big difference between Kushya mit a shin and Kushya mit a tof. Kushya Lepler was the chassid of the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Marash. The Marash was in his 30s. Kushya Lepler was close to 90. But he told him, bis heint hab ich dir zu dir gerät lenechach du. Von itz daran bis der Rebbe. Tu an a hitl and zog chassidus. You crown a Rebbe, you're a Rebbe, and you tell him what to do. Kushya Lepler was in that class. Until today, hab ich mit dir gerät lenechach. I spoke to you first person, you. Second person. From now on, you're a Rebbe. Put on a hat and say chassidus. Kushya Lepler. Kushya Lepler is the consummate Chabad chassid because he epitomized in a most extreme way the whole chiddush of Chabad of Avodah B'Keach Atzmi. Why? Because the Alter Rebbe gave him Peilish Chassidus. Alter Rebbe gave him Peilish Chassidus. He came to the Alter Rebbe and he said to the Alter Rebbe, hack me up them linken side, chop off my left side. And the Alter Rebbe went into Advekis. And the Alter Rebbe said everything was with a nign. I don't know the nign, so I can't sing the nign. The nign kedarke. Va'atom achayes kulam. Shainem eicharai. Va'atom achayes kulam. You give life to everybody. Shine into him. So Kushya Lepler became a tzaddik. I'll get back to this in a minute. Then when the Mittler Rebbe became a Rebbe, and he didn't understand the Chassidus. He had a heart, he had no brain, he was a poshtarid. He was a kremer, he was a retail merchant. So he came to the Mittler Rebbe, and the Mittler Rebbe didn't give him no magic. The Mittler Rebbe told him, Ein lach davar ha'emed b'fnei ha'rotz. And he willed himself into one of the greatest maskilim ever, the deepest Chassidus ever written. The Sefer Imrei Bina was written for Kushya Lepler. And the Tzemach Tzedek told the Rebbe Marash, who was struggling with Imrei Bina, Kushya Lepler was in Lubavitch. A shaile named Rebina darf man fragen bei Rabbi Paltiel. The Tzemach Tzedek said, a shaile named Rebina darf man fragen bei Rabbi Paltiel. And there's a whole hemshech hasib, but I don't want to take up the whole class with the story. So Kushya Lepler has two lives, by the Alter Rebbe and by the Mittler Rebbe. By the Alter Rebbe gave him for free. The Mittler Rebbe taught him Chabad, Chochma Bina V'das, Tzadik B'Manosa Yichye, without the Al Tikri. So the word geht azoi, that during the Nesias of the Alter Rebbe, when his Chasidus was in the derech of Poland, right? Tzaddik Poland used to give people Avos Hashem, Yiras Hashem, like I give you a lunch. Mamish, they were big tzaddikim. So Rabbi Paltiel had the moods. It says in a Yemei that there were times that Kushya Lepler would daven Shachas Mincha Ma'ariv one after the other. There was no time to be mafsik. But at other times, daven with the minyan. Because it was moody. And I don't speak Russian, but maybe you do. He used to say, Tzadik Prishal, Tzadik Ushal. Right? The Tzadik came, am I saying it correctly? The Tzadik came, the Tzadik left. But by the Mittler Rebbe, that was over. Why? Because by the Alter Rebbe, it wasn't him, it was the Alter Rebbe. So when the Tzadik would come, when he had Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem, he would daven the whole day. And when the Tzadik left, Avedas he didn't do, but he davened with the minyan. That's, the Melucha Memshola is Tzadik Prishal, Tzadik Ushal. When you're davening, you have Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And when you're not davening, you don't have Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. So the Rebbe says, even when you're davening, you're not really a melech. Because since when you're going to finish davening, the Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem during the davening is going to pass. So even while you're davening, you're not really a melech, you're really only a shalit, really only a Moshe. That's the first story. The second story is Menishvi Avort. And I saw it in print, and I forgot where. I saw it in print. I just think it's a very important vort. It's a simple vort, but it's an important vort. There was a great chassid whose name was the Radatz. Reb David Tzvi Chen. He was the son of Reb Peretz Hagadol, Reb Peretz Chernigiv. He was a Ben Skunim. When he was born, Reb Peretz was 47. Was 47, 43. Reb Peretz was born Tov Kuf Nun Zayin, he was born Tov Reish. That means 1797 and 1840. The Rebbe used to call him Hirschel the Rav. Hirschel, the Rebbe knew him, the Rebbe saw him as Tanya. He passed away in 1926. The Rebbe was born in 1904. Hirschel the Rav, Hirschel Chernigiv. Yisrael Jacobson writes about him in his Sefer with such hardness hakavod. Yisrael Jacobson, that he's Mafatel Alamin. He describes the Radatz as a Yid Tzaddik. You know, there's a story which is, again, stories that have good makaides. That when he would daven, the Radatz was a Rav in Chernigiv, it was a big city. So he would go into the shul and he would lock the door, and people would stand by the window and watch. He would daven in shul, but by himself. And then he davened. In the middle of davening, he fell on the ground. The pichu should die in Beraglaim. His eyes were open, and he was in a different realm. And people saw this through the window. I forgot whether they ran in to save him or not. When this came to the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Rashab was much younger than him. The Rebbe Rashab was 20 years younger than him. The Rebbe Rashab kam und dann, ich habe gemeint, dass größere Balmeichen. The Rebbe Rashab's comment. Ich habe gemeint, dass you understand what you're talking? The Rebbe said, I thought he has a bigger head. He could control his hergation. Ich habe gemeint, dass größere Balmeichen. This is, ich meine, versteht man solche Dargis. So the story with the Radatz was, he was a child when his father, the Peretz, brought him to Tzemach Tzedek. And there's a famous story saying Baruch Atah. You should know who you're saying Atah to. But he was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. He was 26 years old. Tzemach Tzedek was a tzaddik. He was already a man. He was from the Greis Chassidim by the Rebbe Marash. He was by the Zikne Chassidim by Rebbe Nishmas Hayden, and he was even Mechmeim Bam Friedrich, and passed away Pei Vov. He moved to Eretz Yisrael at the very end of his life. His son was a Mendel Chaim. He was killed al Kiddush Hashem, the Nezhen Erov. Anyway, the Rebbe Maharash said to the Radatz, quote, Es ist Zeit zu trachten wegen Avedes HaTzadik. The Rebbe Maharash said to Reb David Hirsch, he was in his 40s, in his 30s. It's time to think about Avedes HaTzadik. But there's the whole word. Kol ha'olam kulei eimim lecha tzadik ato hayei beinecha kirosh. The whole oilam Moshe Helam tells you you're a tzaddik, you should know you're still a Beinani. But the Rebbe Marash is not part of Kol Oilam Kulei. The Rebbe is part of Kol Agilei Kulei. So when the Rebbe says to a chassid, it's time to start thinking about the Rebbe saying to him, you're ready to graduate from Beinani to tzaddik. Now, it's a different avodah. The Beinani fights. The Beinani is always vulnerable. The tzaddik doesn't have that same vulnerability. It's a different kind of avodah, I'm imagining. It's a much more peaceful avodah. How do you transition? As ich will gewusst die Sachen. Ich weiß nicht. But the stories, I know. The stories, just the fact that you get a lebedik depiction of this whole Indian. Yeah. What's the difference? The difference is that tzaddik's avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem is not like kusha lepla's ava v'yireh. It doesn't come and go. It's constant. Why? Because there's no Yitzhar Hara. If there's no Yitzhar Hara and you love the Eibishter, there's no reason to stop loving the Eibishter. Second love. There's nothing else to love besides for the Eibishter. That's Madregas Tzaddik. But not Beinani. A Beinani, in Perek Yud Beis, he says that during davening he's a melech. Not during davening he's a shalit, he's a moishel. And here the Rebbe says, if a person is a melech now, in a shalit and an hour, he's really not a melech, even when he feels like a melech, because of the principle of Olay Malay Yemen. And the Rebbe continues. Aval Beinani. It's the second to the last line on page 36. However, by a Beinani, who derech moshel kodem sheyosh. It's like, for example, a person who's asleep. During davening, the Beinani is in a state of avas Hashem and yiras Hashem. Meyes berah, betachas asina, shalei betachas asina. I mean, I don't know if you can say those words. But whatever the case is, Shishasn is asleep, b'chol asmali. In the left bench, top of page, your test now. No. Sheyashni is asleep. Sheyachel lachzer v'leyer mishinose. That he can come back and wake up from its sleep. After you sleep, kach, the same is also true. that Harabe Beinani, the evil in a Beinani is, what am I holding? Hukiyashan b'cholol asmali is like a sleep in the left side of the heart. B'shas kiddush matfilah, when he's learning, when he's saying Shema and davening. But he doesn't say Torah. You have to understand. He only says tefillah, because only by tefillah do you use your heart. All day when you're learning Torah, you're only using your mind. That's not going to make you into Avas Hashem. Shali be'ber ba'avas havaya. Tefillah, one's heart is on fire in a revealed Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. Then it comes back. When you finish davening, so the Rebbe says, like I told you before, a keser of a king for a day is not a. So even though during davening you're like a melech, because when you're finishing davening, you're not going to do anything. Revert from melech to meishel. So even when you're davening, you're really not a melech, you're only a meishel. Lachain continues the Rebbe. This is why. On the very first page of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says clearly, Ta Rabbi. The Rabbi was wrong. The Rabbi was absolutely wrong. The Rabbi was a tzaddik gomor. And Ve'ed Ve'hu Ha'ikir, Rabbi was a Nasi from the Gemara, so Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef. And they were Chaverim. And that Shmuel Hanavi, Shmuel, that Amir Shmuel, he never had tzmicha. But he knew Sefer Adam Kadma had the Sefer of Adam edition. Or I forgot who had the Sefer Adam Kadma. And he said that the Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef Molech, they're both going to be the Nasi of the Sanhedrin. So Rabbi Yosef right away said, him first. Why? He wanted to live longer. So that's what happened. Rabbi was Melech, I think, for 17 years. And when Rabbi passed away, Rabbi Yosef, they were Chavedim, was Mamala Mekayme, as the Nasi of the yeshiva, wherever it was. I don't know, someplace in Bavel, Surah, Papadan, whatever it was. Because they saw in Sefer Adam Kadmor that both Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef are going to be the Nasi. And Rabbi Yosef said, him first. Him first means that when Rabbi passes away, his job begins. And he was a Nasi for a short time, I think. I mean, I haven't seen these Gemaras in years, but it's not good to quote something you don't know. But the Toichen Advarim is richtig. Rabbi was a Nasi B'Yisrael. You know who Rabbi Ben Nachmani was? You know this Rabbi, the Rebbe of Abaye. You know who this Rabbi Nachmani was? This is, you know this Gemara. Iflaku b'mesifte de Rakia, Sofak Seir Lov and Kodma LaBeheres. Ma Neichach, Rabbi Ben Nachmani. There was a machlaikis between Kutchabrichu and Mesifte de Rakia. And they needed a Pesach. Who did they choose? This same Rabbi who says, I'm a Beinani. Du verstehst? It's a whole arichas in the Gemara that he passed in Tahir. And he said the word Tahir is Neshama left this world. It's a whole story in the Gemara about the Rabbi. So the Rabbi says, I'm a Beinani. Al Rebbe says, kidding? It's a toss. But a toss is not a tipshis. You understand? A toss is not a stupidity. You know, in Chassidus they talk about an honor and a shofel. Honor means a humble person. A shofel means a person who puts himself down. That's not an avodah, it's not a derech, it's a kamenshnish. The easiest thing in the world to say, I'm nothing. I'm a chayy. I'm nothing means don't hold me responsible for anything. There's no achrayis. It's time to say, ich bin garnished. If a rabbi says, I know a beinani, it's not shiftless. It's not, I don't want to be responsible, so leave me alone, I'm a beinani. No, it was Rabbi thought he was a beinani. So even though Torah Rabbi, it's for sure a mistake. But it's a mistake of Rabbi Ben Nachmani. And if it's a mistake of Rabbi Ben Nachmani, Sricha Limud, why could he have made this mistake? So the Rebbe says, so now you understand. The Rebbe says, now you understand. What do you understand? What do you understand? That if a Beinani is a person, that during davening he's like a tzaddik, and after davening, Yetzirah comes back. Let's continue to read. That's why Rabbi made the mistake of assuming that he's a Beinani. Even though, or if you want to say it differently, precisely because, delay, Pasuk Pumame gives his mouth, never stopped learning Gemara, Teda. And he learned the Teda of the Eibishter with great chayfet, with great desire day and night. with a desire and a longing and a thirst and a thirsting soul, la Hashem, to the Eibush, to Ba'ava Rabba, with an infinite love. And then the Rebbe says, Ki b'shas Krishma Tefillah. Like most people when they're saying Shema and Tefillah. You have over here a very, very big Chiddush. A very, very big Chiddush. And this Chiddush explains Rabbi's mistake. Beklal, you say that a Benyani experiences Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem when he says Krishma and Tefillah. I showed you inside a few lines ago, yeah? What about when a Benyani is learning Torah? When a Benyani is learning Torah, you don't say there's Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. Why? You're using only his mind. Rabbi learned Torah like most people daven, you see. Rabbi learned Torah with Abba V'Yira. How do you learn Torah with Abba V'Yira? Leave it to Rabbi. So because he learned Torah with Abba V'Yira, which meant he was such an exceptional man, that not only did he have a dveikus in the Eibishter when he davened and he learned, he had a dveikus in the Eibishter when he was learning Torah. So he turned that around to say, I'm not Beinani. Why? I'm davening all day long. If I'll stop davening, I'll find out the Harav Torah. The emes is, it was a toss. But this is the head bit of the toss. The explanation, how could Rabbi have made this mistake, was because his learning Torah, I'm going to read the words with you again. His learning Torah was like most people's davening. So he was davening all day and all night. If he's davening all day and all night, he has Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem all day and all night. He never knows. Is he a melech? Or is he a temporary melech? Is he a melech because he's davening? Or he's a melech who's hagi b'tainis? He never found out. So in typical defensive mode, he said, Ana Beinani. Alter Rebbe says Tah, but the Tah has a hezbid. It's an explanation for the Tah. Let's read it again. Okay? Let's start the last line, the first line of the page. Kach. Harabba Beinani, a regular Beinani, not Rabba. When he davens, so his evil is ki Yoshem is asleep, a chola smoli in the left side of the heart. Bishas Krishma Tefillah. Over here there's no chaf. When he's saying Shema, when he's davening, what's the diuk of the words Bishas Krishma Tefillah? When he's not saying Krishma and he's not davening, he doesn't have Asher Yisrael, even when he's learning Torah. Shali be'ber ba'avas Hashem, his heart is on fire with Avas Hashem. But ve'achakach, when he finishes davening and learning, Yochal liyas chayze v'neir, the Nefesh Bahamas comes back, even if he's learning Gemara, even if he's learning a Maimach Chassidus, because it's even from Moyach, it's not even from Lev. V'lachein, says the Rebbe, understanding what I just told you about a Beinani explains the Rabbi's mistake. Hoya Rabbi machazik atzmei ke Beinani. Rabbi said about himself that he's a Beinani even though it's a toss. But why did he make this mistake? Even though, and again, dafke because, the lay Pasuk from Megir says, mouth never stopped learning Torah. Ubetera said Hashem cheftzei, and the Eibush is Torah he desired, yemim v'lal day and night. But then the Alter Rebbe adds more words, which is not normally true by learning Torah. V'chafetza, v'chasheka, u'tshuka, v'nefesh kekel, ad Hashem ba'ava rabba. His Torah had an ava rabba, and the Rebbe adds a chof. Ki, b'shas krishma tefillah, like the typical Beini krishma tefillah. So Rabba is unique. In other words, if Rabba is a Beinani, he's a very weird, he's a very anomalous kind of a Beinani. Why? Because he's a Beinani whose Torah is like most people's tefillah, and this is how he surmised. This is why he made the mistake of saying Ana Beinani. V'nidma be'einav, he envisioned about himself ke Beinani hamispalol kalayim, like a Beinani davens all day long. U'kamayim result. This is the Gemara that Rabbi Yechanan says, Halavai sheyispalol adam kol hayim kulei. Halavai, that a person should daven all day long. So there's a need of kol hayim kulei davening. So the Alter Rebbe teaches, what is the chassidus of kol hayim kulei davening, as opposed to what? Going shopping? No, it's supposed to learning Torah. Now the halacha is, as the Gemara says, it's man Torah l'chud, it's man tefillah l'chud, the time for davening, time for learning. But what's the halavai sheyispalol adam kol kulei? Al pi chassidus, not al pi halacha. Al pi chassidus, because when you're davening and learning, you have Avos Hashem, you're davening, not learning. You have Avos Hashem, Yiras Hashem. When you're learning Torah, you're not having Avos Hashem. So halavai, you know what halavai means? I wish I could, but I can't. I have to learn Torah. When I'm learning Torah, I have a Yetzer Hara. This is the Ratzon Elyon. Rabbi's Torah was like the halavai of Rabbi Yechanan. Halavai, she is follow of them, kol hayim kulei, davening a ganzen tag. In other words, they should not just have a connection to the Eibush, to the Torah mitzvahs. You should be in the madregas tzaddik of Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. So Rabbi's wrong. But we understand this mistake. So to finish the shir, we learned half a pedic, more than half a pedic. And what we did was answer questions that were asked in the first pedic of Tanya. Number one, how could you say about a Beinin Zevazeh Sheftan? Beinin Zevazeh Sheftan, he has no Averis. So the Alter Rebbe answers Sheftan, he hears the voice of the Yetzer Hara. But he never listens to the Yetzer Hara. Then we asked, but a person is not supposed to say, the mission says in Avos, Al Teirasha with Neatzma, and he's going to become depressed. And what's worse than depression? Yochal Lovo they call Chas v'Shalom. What's the teretz? Kirasha is not Rasha. Not Hayei Beinecha Rasha. Hayei Beinecha Kirasha. What's the title? Kirasha Beinani. And now we just spent a whole page answering Eich Tor Abba Ba'atzmi Lemishu Beinani. So we answered three of the big questions that we asked in the beginning of the Tanya. It took us till Perek Yud Gimel, because it wasn't until Perek Yud Beis that we explained what the Alter Rebbe calls also in Perek Aleph Muhus Madregas HaBeinani. What's the real substance of the step of the Madrega of a Beinani? And again, we're using the label, we're using the mishpat based on the Rebbe's Rishimis, Melucha Umemshala. And once we explained Beinani, we answered these three questions. And there's more to come in this issue. Questions or comments? Okay, is jeder zufrieden, bin ich zufrieden. Am Mashiach kommt